title for this event is quite juicy, I think. Corruption, capital flight, and women. It kind of sounds like the three ingredients for a Hollywood movie, actually. Which, of course, actually it is. Corruption can be anything from big businesses and countries, corrupt politicians hiding their fortunes in tax havens, to women who are bribed and have to pay sexual favors to their teachers, perhaps, in order to get the grades that they need. Capital flight, often a consequence of corruption. It turns out the amount of illicit capital flight from Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia is equal to the amount that the UN is currently spending on water and food and emergency relief in order to save lives during the ongoing crisis. So that kind of gives us an image of the impact of being able to actually penetrate and do something about this field. As far as I've been able to find, there aren't that many linkages made between capital flight and women, at least not when I Google, which is where I've been finding my information. Gender and corruption, however, has become a bit of a field, which starts in 2001 with the World Bank report, which funnily enough kind of ends up concluding that women are less corrupt than men. Inherently, we are born that way. And so therefore, if we just get more women into politics, we solve the issue of corruption. But this has of course been exposed as perhaps a bit of an easy explanation. One reason for why women might be less corrupt than men, of course, may be that we're not in the same positions as men, we don't have access to the boys' clubs, etc. And as we all know, I think when women do get into positions of power, they can be as corrupt as their male counterparts.
Como mujeres encontramos muchas limitantes, incluso siendo abogadas, existe la discriminación hacia nosotras las mujeres porque queremos transformar un sistema jurídico que ha sido prepotente, que ha sido androcéntrico y es machista al momento de estar litigando en los casos penales. Guatemala es un país signatario de la Convención de Belém do Pará y de la CEDAW y otras clases de normas legales a favor de las mujeres que en los casos concretos no las aplican. La justicia la aplican hombres, las leyes las crean hombres, la justicia las hacen los hombres. Las mujeres se encuentran que el delito de violencia contra la mujer no puede existir. No existe porque no se puede probar, en principio, la violencia psicológica. Nos encontramos ante la problemática que son casos difíciles de probar ante los ojos de la justicia nacional. Hemos identificado en la problemática que en los casos en donde no hay abogados o abogadas que apoyen a la víctima, los casos se cierran. Identificamos también de que a nivel nacional en Guatemala no nos damos abasto. Es decir, son 22 departamentos. Nosotras somos una asociación pequeña, pero sin embargo, nosotras hacemos hasta lo imposible para llegar a las mujeres, para explicarles, para asesorarles, para que sean mujeres que puedan hacer justicia en su propia vida. El sentido de que nosotras estemos apoyando en estos casos es para que crear un mundo donde haya justicia y donde la impunidad y la corrupción ya no continúe.
For those of you who don't know, the main goal for Transparency International is to fight corruption. And we think the most important thing you can do to prevent that that's happening in the first place is to ask and demand for transparency. In Transparency International, we define corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. So, some ways in which women are affected disproportionately by corruption. The first one is called access to decision-making, which is a major challenge for women in many countries. Second cluster of problems is protection and advancement of rights under the law. Since women generally lack access to resources, any case that is brought to remedy claims against discrimination will likely be lost if the defendant can pay off the prosecutors or the judges involved. And I think maybe that is touching upon the complex problems that you were describing, Jennifer, from Guatemala. Corruption reduces public revenue, often resulting in lower levels of spending on education, healthcare, family benefits, and other social services. The fight against corruption is complex, related to many factors and levels in society. The most important one is probably governance reform. We believe that is the cure. Gender equality must, of course, then be mainstreamed into these efforts. And then we also need to hammer on our governments to do the right things. It's very unfortunate they are not here today. So, it's a huge task, daunting task, and we get overwhelmed, and maybe we get even paralyzed by all this, because it's so much, and it's so structural and so huge. But we cannot allow ourselves to be paralyzed.
It's not so easy, perhaps, to see the very direct link between what Jennifer is talking about and what I'm going to talk about. But there is a link, although we can't really see it. But there are issues that needs to be addressed on a structural level to secure women's rights, which is about the funding of everything that has to do with development and investment in all those things that secure our rights. So in this report, 10 of the most powerful extractive industry companies, they have 6,038 subsidiaries. That's 1/3 of them are in tax havens. A tax haven, it's a place, sometimes a state, where the law structures are built up with the sole purpose to provide secrecy for those registered companies there. It's about shifting the money where it's not taxed. We have one mechanism which we're working for. It's called country-by-country reporting. It just means that a company, when it operates in one country, they have to say what they're actually paying to the country. Before, a company could easily say, we paid this to Asia, we paid this to Africa, this to Latin America, and nobody knew where the money was really going, to which country, to which project, where is the money going. It's so basic, but there's no international regulation on it.
The fight against corruption required a strong collective action. Therefore, there are many ways or avenues in order to fight corruption. We started from the assumption that the promotion and protection of human rights and the fight against corruption are mutually reinforcing. From a human rights point of view, vulnerable and disadvantaged groups must be put at the center of public policies. Their needs and protection must be addressed as a matter of priority. It is easy to see that in a country where human rights are not respected, in which there is no freedom of association, freedom of expression, free and pluralist media, or access to education, it's much more difficult for citizens to hold governments accountable. They have to have access to information that have to be in a non-technical language, but in plain language so they can understand. A real access for information law that it is analyzed from a human rights perspective will ask the question, who is accessing the information? And it is very clear, for example, we did that in Mexico, that has a very progressive access to information law. Those who were accessing the access to information law were generally white men from the elites. As you know, women are overrepresented among the poor. The majority of people living in poverty are women and are underrepresented in decision-making bodies. Despite that it's clear that corruption affects women disproportionately because they're poor, because they have less resources, and because they have no power, for years, corruption was seen as gender neutral. There is no a consistent gender approach in anti-corruption strategies around the world. Let me conclude by saying corruption is still pervasive in many countries of the world. Despite all the rhetoric, the political impact of anti-corruption campaign has been very little. But what is important is that to look beyond the formalities of a convention, of a law, or how to implement it, and we look at the symmetries of power in the society, especially in the South, and how we can overpass the obstacles that disadvantaged group and women face in order to combat corruption and strengthen the anti-corruption system.